Are we live, folks? I believe we are. We are live now, I believe. Can somebody in the chat give me a thumbs up that we are live? I don't know why. I think we're live. Okay,
I'm alive.
They said they liked my shirt, so we're live.
All
Hello,
right.
everybody. Welcome to our live show with Distinguished Professor of History at American University, Allan Lichtman. Say what's up to the people, Allan.
Hey, good to be speaking to you, although, these are difficult times. Before I say anything else, I want to say my heart goes out to all of the people in Maui. It's just a horrible human tragedy, and we all should be thinking about them and contributing if we can. But of course, the huger issue is humanity is on the brink from catastrophic climate change. And I do not know whether people are going to wake up in time. I hope they will, but we've wasted so many years.
Yeah, tragedy out in Hawaii, obviously. We are not experts in what's happening out there in wildfires or climate change. We are not a news service, so we can't give you any additional information that CNN or MSNBC or Fox or whoever is giving you. So we just wanted to start the episode like that, but, touch on it, say that we are thinking of the people in Hawaii. But he's an elections expert. He's a presidential expert. And some big news in elections and presidential history this week. Donald Trump, former president of the United States, charged with a RICO charge in Fulton County, Georgia. And we're not talking about Rico Suave here, Dad. That was a good one. You like that one?
Yeah, I like that.
We're not talking about Rico Suave here. We're talking about racketeering.
Right.
And, Dad, actually, I have a little gift for you to start off the show.
You do?
Yes.
Is it a bust of Rudy Giuliani?
No, it's a glorious Georgia peach.
All
for
right.
you.
I love it.
In honor of, or in relation to what we just saw in Georgia, a beautiful Georgia peach. What do you think about the peach, Dad?
I think it's about as peachy as what we just saw in Georgia. A RICO indictment of Donald Trump and 18 others co-conspirators. Now, why is this uniquely significant? First of all, it's a state case. That means no matter what happens with the presidential election, no president could pardon or commute a sentence given to Donald Trump or any of his co-conspirators if they're convicted. Even the governor of Georgia does not have unilateral pardon power. There's a pardon committee. That is huge. Secondly, it is under a racketeering charge. I was just absolutely bemused to see Rudy Giuliani, who made his name bringing RICO charges, saying, "Oh, I can't believe they've charged me under RICO. That's only for mobsters." Well,
mobsters.
Mobsters, pretty scary. Well, of course, when Giuliani was bringing prosecutions, he brought plenty of prosecutions for political corruption, including against his political enemies. Now he's crying crocodile tears about it. And the truth is, if these charges are true, and at this point they're only charges, we can have opinions about them, but obviously they have to be proven in a court of law, then Trump and his cronies did act like a mob. Their object was maybe not to sell drugs, but to destroy our democracy and steal an election. This is one of the most important indictments, along with the January 6th federal indictment, in the history of the country.
Now, I want to piggyback on that. Kevin asked, and this is what I was going to ask you too, in a previous episode, you ranked his indictments from most serious to least serious. And Georgia wasn't out at the time. Now it's out, so we have a lot more information. At that time, you ranked it 3. Is it still 3? Behind the January 6th and behind the documents case, or the national security case, as you like to say. Because you like to say, it's not a documents case.
It's not a documents case. All right.
Georgia, you had ranked 3. Is it still ranked 3?
Tied for 1 now.
Whoa, tied for 1.
Who would have expected such a sweeping indictment that even more clearly, because it's so much broader in scope and has all these other charges against co-conspirators, it most clearly lays out in graphic, lurid, and sad terms the length and breadth of this conspiracy. You know, it involved 5 or 6, not just one, 5 or 6 different strategies and dozens of overt acts in pursuit of those strategies. Just to name a few, pressuring state legislators, giving lies and false information to overturn the election to the state legislature, pressuring state officials like the Secretary of State to overturn the election, organizing bogus slates of fraudulent electors.
We know all this. Everybody
right.
knows all this, right?
Maybe.
Well, most people here are pretty politically savvy.
They are pretty
know.
savvy, yeah.
We understand exactly what happened. Tell us why it's moved to number 1. Because of the gravity, because of they threw the book at him. Give us a specific reason why it's moved to number 1, not the list what's in it.
Yeah. It's moved to number 1 because it is the singular case that lays out virtually everything that Trump and his cronies did. The January 6th case is more of a precision rifle shot. It only charges Trump, and its charges are limited. This is a shotgun blast that hits Trump and top cronies like Giuliani and Mark Meadows and his crazy attorneys like Sidney Powell and John Eastman. It's a shotgun blast that hits everything and everybody.
That's a good analysis, sir.
Thank you
for that.
Yeah.
Good handshake for that, too.
So from now on, we'll call it the Fani Willis shotgun.
Wow, that's a pretty good one.
Yeah.
Maybe a little violent.
Why not?
Okay, too violent for me, but not
Yeah.
for him. Here's a good question from Benji, and you and I were chatting about this earlier. You know, Trump's legal team has always gotten him off. He seems to delay, he seems to stall, he seems to appeal. Why is this Georgia case any different? Can't he just keep stalling, keep appealing, and make this run on forever? Because the difference with this case, one of the big differences, is he can't pardon himself if he wins, right? On the other cases, he can. And this one, he can't. The other ones, he might be able to continually appeal to the Supreme Court. What about this one? What makes Georgia different?
What makes Georgia different, of course, is there can be no pardon. It's a state case, and it's unlikely, although it could get to the Supreme Court. So here's what Trump is trying to do. He knows he can't win in court. You know, he doesn't have a legal argument. None of his bluster will pass muster in court. As I think I've said before, he can huff and he can puff, but he can't blow the courthouse down. And once you get into court, you have to have facts and evidence, not just, political blowhard claims. So he knows he really doesn't have much of a defense in court. So he wants to delay these cases as long as possible, which is his MO, since what he did when he was charged in the early 1970s with his real estate company violating the Fair Housing Act by discriminating against African Americans. He delayed that for years. That's what he hopes to do here. So he hopes for the federal case that either he wins or a Republican wins and they just dismiss it, they get rid of it, end of story. And he's hoping to flip the state cases where there can't be a pardon to the Supreme Court, just like what happened when the governor of Virginia was charged and ultimately the Supreme Court reversed the verdict of the jury. So he's counting on delay, pardon, commutation, Supreme Court. The one thing he doesn't want is to actually have to go into court and present a real defense.
Well, he's going to have to be in court at some point, right?
He doesn't believe that. He thinks he can delay all of these cases beyond the election. I do not believe that. I think at least 2 or 3, and maybe all of them, will take place before the election. We'll know pretty soon about the January 6th case that's in federal court. It's a very savvy, very tough judge, Judge Chutkan, and she's going to announce pretty quickly when that case is going to take place. And it's not a complicated case. The facts are, in fact, pretty well known. They were mostly known after the January 6th committee released its report. Yeah, the special counsel has more stuff, but the basics are all known. I think that trial is going to take place in early 2024.
You're talking about the Jack Smith case.
The Jack Smith case. And I think if the New York case, the case about hush money and falsifying business records, that case will move, if need be, in deference to the federal case.
What about Atlanta in relation to the Jack Smith case? Apparently, Andrew has let me know that Jack Smith says the estimate for the January 6th trial will take only 6 weeks. So will Atlanta come after that? Will it come before it? It can't happen during it. Is that correct?
It can't happen during it because Trump has to be there.
Right. So it's gonna. What do you think? Is it gonna come? Is Fulton County gonna come after or before?
I think everyone is
January 6th.
going to defer to Jack Smith.
Okay.
Quite frankly, to the federal case. But you could see 4 cases, each lasting several weeks, coming one after the other, of course, right during the whole primary election season. Doesn't mean Trump can't win primaries.
Right.
Everybody knows who he is already. He's the one candidate who doesn't actually need to campaign.
Yeah, I mean, you saw him. I'm sure people saw videos of him in Iowa. They seem to love him. And
I just read, there was an article in the New York Post, very conservative paper. It's a pretty good article about what was going on in Georgia. Then I read the comments, and I couldn't believe them. Remember we talked about those 2 election workers, one of them Ruby Friedman, the African Americans, who were defamed and slandered and falsely called fraudsters. Trump and Giuliani essentially ruined their lives. Trump's followers are still calling them fraudsters. In fact, one said, Ruby Freeman has now confessed the entire election is all about fraud. Another post said, there are 150,000 illegal votes cast in Georgia, all of them for Donald Trump. And of course, George Soros is all over this, the mastermind of every evil in America. If George Soros had 1/10 of the power that these extremists attribute to him, he would be the king of the world.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like these people online, you had a video, some people had mentioned it in the chat earlier, you had a video that was posted this week, and it somehow got flooded by MAGA trolls. And they seem to just be digging in their heels. They don't seem to be retreating at all.
They're not retreating 1 inch of anything.
Right.
They're more fiery than they ever have been.
There seems to be this weird rhetoric within Trump defenders saying that we're a republic and not a democracy. But it's very strange because we're both. We're both
we're a democratic republic.
Or a Republican democracy, whatever you want to call it, right?
Your mom and my wife, the brilliant Karen Strickler, points out there's a bigger problem here. It goes way beyond Trump. It goes to all of those within the Republican Party, including supposed moderates, like Lindsey Graham or Ted Cruz or Congresswoman Stefanik in New York, who are playing right into Trump's hands, reiterating and repeating his vicious attacks on our justice system. And this is fueling violence. This is not innocent stuff. These people are, really doing some very dangerous things. They're really playing with fire. And we just saw, the arrest of that woman who wanted to kill the judge in the January 6th case. We saw, a year ago or so, a gunman in Texas gunning down Hispanics, repeating Trump's lies about, an invasion of criminals in our country. This is not just ordinary political argument. Unfortunately, this has gone way beyond. It's dangerous, it's corrosive to our democracy, and sadly, too many Republicans are buying into Trump. We need more voices in the Republican Party like Asa Hutchinson, Chris Christie, and remarkably now even Mike Pence.
Yeah, I wonder at what point Republicans in Congress will start backtracking, because it is getting a little bit ridiculous at this point.
It's getting frightening.
Yeah.
It's scary.
Do you think, I'm as a question to you, at what point are they going to back down? Or are they going to backtrack? Never? Are they just going to always use whataboutism and point to, Black Lives Matter as violent? Or are they ever going to retreat at all?
Well, politics is like Wall Street. It runs on fear and greed. And right now they're greedy to appeal to the Trump base as they see it. And, having read those comments, the notion that this base won't crack, has some real validity. I don't know how large it is. It may be as low as, 30 to 35%, but he does have this absolute unshakable core. But at some point, fear for these Republicans might take over from greed, and they'll become fearful about what Trump is doing to their quest to hold and gain political power. They're not going to do it out of principle.
Well, we saw
They're
that.
going to do it out of fear.
We saw that for a moment during January 6th. Republicans, I think, out of fear and out of complete shock, did start to attack Trump, and
Even Kevin McCarthy did.
Right, but eventually it faded away.
Eventually, greed took over from fear for them. And our only hope is not that they'll suddenly see the light of principle, but that fear will drive them back at least in the direction of doing the right thing. They're so far from it now.
Yeah, I guess we'll just have to wait and see. I don't know. It's hard to tell. It's really hard to tell. Question from Gamer. What makes you think there will be a conviction before Election Day? The judicial process is known for being very slow and takes many years on cases. So why is this different?
It doesn't always take many years in cases. I think, it may be a very long delay for the national security case because you're dealing with confidential documents. You're dealing with a judge who's very sympathetic to Donald Trump. But I think the January 6th case is going to move quickly. It's a simple case. It's a rifle shot. And you have a judge who's already said it's in the national interest to get over with this. It is in the national interest to know whether Trump is guilty or not. Right now, in terms of the court, he is innocent until proven guilty. Do the American people want this uncertainty hanging over their heads? I think Judge Chutkan is going to move this forward within 6 or 7 months.
Question from Catherine. What about Arizona? She says she just saw a report that there may also be a file on the same/similar charges in Arizona. Have you heard about that?
Yes, and I think that's very likely because there was the same kind of pressure on legislators in Arizona as we saw in Georgia. Rusty Bowers, who was I think the speaker or someone very high up in the Republican leadership in the legislature, testified about the unconscionable pressure that was put on him. And every time he kept asking, all right, you're making these outrageous charges, give me some proof. If you give me proof, I might act. And of course, they never, ever gave him proof. That was some of the most compelling testimony we saw on the January 6th committee. So I think there will be, maybe some charges about that kind of pressure, about setting up fake electors. We already saw charges in Michigan about fake electors. Right. Let me stress, these were not just the notion that, we're going to stand by just in case the courts rule in our favor. Courts had already ruled. It was over. Trump had every right to go to the courts, and he did, and he lost. But then these electors, directed from the top, apparently, according to the indictments, posed fraudulently as though they were the legitimate electors of the states, and according to the indictments, even sent in fraudulent election certificates to the National Archives. I've got to get this out. These commentators are all terrific. They're all friends of mine. I love them. But they are so wrong about one thing.
What?
Trump's intent. They're doubly wrong about that. First, they're wrong in thinking that Trump actually believes things are true or false. No, that is not part of what Trump's MO is. I wrote about this 6 years ago in my book, The Case for Impeachment. Trump does not think like most people in terms of what's true or false. He only thinks about what is good for him. Everything is transactional. That's why he's willing to throw out the most outlandish theories he himself said were crazy, because he thinks that would help him, stay in power. So as the Zen master once said, unask that question. It's irrelevant. Trump didn't care about the truth or falsity. He just wanted to use whatever means possible, including, according to the charges, illegal means to stay in power. Secondly, even if he genuinely believed that the election was stolen from him. That does not give him the right to engage in illegal conduct. You know, O.J. Simpson genuinely believed that this group of people had stolen his memorabilia, and it was true. But that did not give him the right to break into their hotel room to try to steal it back, and he got a long prison term for that.
Oh, you're always bringing it back to OJ, Dad.
Always.
Always. Joshua D. asks, is there any chance that that Hunter Biden's troubles could end up turning the scandal key for Joe Biden? Uh-oh, that was a weird pause.
Yeah, not if it's just Hunter Biden.
Right.
You know, the Republicans have been pushing this idea that Hunter and Joe were engaged in some corrupt scheme for 4 years. It was investigated by Donald Trump's Justice Department. Bill Barr, his loyalist attorney general, they found no connection. And by the way, this special prosecutor that the Republicans are all squealing about, you know who appointed him?
Donald Trump.
Donald Trump.
Boom. Got it.
Yeah.
Got it.
Pretty good. You get a point. The Republicans were screaming, we want a special prosecutor. Now they got it, and now they're screaming again. But no, unless it's connected to Joe, you don't remember, of course, Billy Carter, the bad brother of Jimmy Carter, who was, you know, a felon for not registering for a foreign government. He tried to sell Billy beer. You know, Billy's transgressions did not mean that Jimmy was any less than an extraordinarily moral person.
Nice comment from Connor Contara. They say, I've been doing a lot of studying while in the Navy on your keys. Yes, I've read your book, and I have to say, you've inspired me to go for political science after I get out.
Awesome.
Thank you, Connor.
Yeah.
There's a lot of questions from Barry Smith, from Bryce E., about how this Georgia case might flip to a federal court and what that might mean for pardoning, for the length of the case, and all that jazz.
Yeah. Mark Meadows has already petitioned to move the case to federal court. And I'm sure Giuliani and Trump will do the same thing. Trump tried that with the New York case and failed. And here's the rub. To move it into federal court, you have to show that what you were charged with was part of your official duties. And I think for Trump especially, and for Giuliani, who is not a public official, I think he has no case, it would be very difficult for Trump to claim that pressuring Raffensperger to change the Georgia elections, orchestrating fake electors, pressuring legislators, pressuring Mike Pence, were part of his official duties.
There you go, folks.
But his strategy is, if I move it into federal court, it'll delay it, maybe till after the election, and then I can be pardoned.
Right. Gosh, there's so many different scenarios that could play out. It's kind of hard to even wrap your mind around it. It's easy to say he'll be in prison, right? Because there's so many indictments against him in so many different places, on so many different levels. But gosh, there's also, like, you know, just statistically speaking, 100 different scenarios in each thing that could play out or that could happen, you know?
91 felony counts.
Right, I mean...
That's, I think, more than John Gotti, you know, the mob boss, ever had.
You know a lot about John Gotti?
Yeah, I do. He's from New York. The Dapper Don.
Ah, the Dapper Don.
But also a murderous mob leader.
Yeah, let's not talk so nicely about him.
His nice clothes didn't excuse that.
The Anonymous Bear asks, who are the most vulnerable senators up for re-election next year, regardless of party?
Well, probably John Tester in Montana. A lot of people are saying Sherrod Brown in Ohio, but I don't think so. I think Sherrod Brown is going to do extremely well. I'm not sure, you know, I haven't really followed the Senate races that closely. I'm not sure there is a real vulnerable Republican, because most of the seats that are now up are Democratic seats in a red state like Montana or Ohio. So it looks like the Democrats have a tougher time. But the way things are going, you know, the Republicans seem, you know, to be on a political suicide mission to go right down the sink with Donald Trump.
Couple folks in the chat asking you about what are your thoughts on the first Republican debate coming up. You got any predictions, any pre-debate outlook on these debates?
You know, it doesn't look like Donald Trump is going to show up, and he doesn't have to. You know, as I said, he doesn't need to campaign. Everybody knows anything they need to know about Donald Trump. You know, within the Republican Party, the views are pretty cemented. But here's what I tell you to look for. Who will have the courage to say the emperor has no clothes? That Donald Trump is a clear and present danger to our democracy, and the Republican Party can't afford to hitch their wagon to the Donald Trump train. It just would be toxic for the party. If you don't do that, what chance do you have against Donald Trump? If you have no courage, if you're spineless, if you have no arguments to make, why should anyone in the Republican Party prefer you to Donald Trump? So this is a test. Who will come out as the profile in courage?
This is in what you just said is in relation to what Theo Meal asked, who's a regular viewer. What's up, Theo? If Trump loses to Biden in 24, will the GOP finally dump him, you think?
I think he'll have dumped himself. I think he'll be in prison, to be quite frank. Plus, I don't know how Donald Trump has made it to 77. Given his eating habits, he's way overweight, he's red-faced. I don't think, even if he stays out of prison, which I don't think is likely, I don't think he's going to be in any shape to make another run in 2028 when he's in his 80s.
Patrick Murray asks, speaking of Arizona, will Ruben Gallego win the Senate seat in Arizona? What do you think, Dad?
I think he's got a good shot. He's a very good candidate. He's got a lot of experience in the state, and I think the opposition is going to be divided between Christine Sinema, the current senator who opted out of the Democratic Party, is now an independent, and a Republican. Normally, you would think she would draw votes from the Democrat, but she's come off, so consistently conservative that she probably has more appeal to Republicans. So I think Gallego has an excellent chance to become one of the, few Hispanic senators. We have a few, but he'll be joining a select group if he wins.
Here's an interesting question from Andrew, a common viewer. Thanks for tuning in, Andrew. What's up? Say what's up to Andrew, Dad. What's the secret of Brian Kemp? He is openly saying the Georgia election wasn't stolen, and Trump can't seem to do anything with his popularity with Republicans.
You've got to make a real distinction between Trump as a national politician and state leaders like Kemp and, of course, DeSantis in Florida, who have built their own following within the state independent of Trump. When I looked at those comments from the, right fringe, they were denouncing Kemp. You would think he was Bernie Sanders, the way they were attacking Kemp because he wasn't joining Donald Trump in illegally trying to overthrow the Georgia election. By the way, a lot of these Trump acolytes, including Giuliani, have admitted that they lied. Giuliani admitted he went before the legislature and told them outright lies, including the defamation of Ruby Freeman and Shay Moss, the two African-American election workers, who he and Trump not only falsely accused of election fraud, but, shamelessly built on stereotypes of African-Americans, claiming they were passing out USB ports as though they were vials of heroin. Oh my God, how low can you sink? And they really ruined the lives of these women who actually had, Trump acolytes coming to their homes and threatening them.
Ben Weinberg brings up the 14th Amendment. There's been a lot of talk about it. I've seen it talked about a lot. I can't get a clear grasp on it and how it might affect Trump. Can you explain it to the people, Pops?
Yeah, the 14th Amendment was passed after the Civil War, and it was in reference to, of course, those who were in rebellion against the United States and disenfranchising and prohibiting those in rebellion against the United States. This is the third section of the 14th Amendment. And there is an argument to be made that if Trump is convicted of the Department of Justice charges, he could be seen as in rebellion against the United States and could be prevented from running for president. But I think that's a very far-fetched scenario. That section of the 14th Amendment has been pretty much of a dead letter.
Dead letter, huh?
Dead letter.
Derek Taylor asks, why don't you have super chats set up on your podcast? Because we're not monetized yet, so we can't have super chats. But if you share this channel with friends, you like our videos, it'll help juice up the YouTube algorithm, and eventually one day we can get monetized and have super chats. Thank you for the question, Taylor.
Of course, I don't even know what super
He has
chat
no.
is,
He
but
has.
that's irrelevant.
He has no clue what any of this means.
No
clue. Let's see here. Gonna shout out a couple people. Oh, here's an interesting question from Joshua D. Maybe to see some of your balanced, nonpartisan side of Allan Lichtman. Joshua asks, I'm curious what your answer would be to this question. If you had to pick one of the current Republicans running for president who are currently running, who would you pick and why for you to vote for?
I'm not going to pick in terms of my own ideology. In that case, I'd probably pick the most obscure of all of them, A.J. Hutchinson, who's been the most vociferous of the Trump critics. But I'm going to put myself in the position of a Republican strategist and say which of the candidates, would have the best chance. Now, remember, the keys to the White House suggest this is all irrelevant and everything's going to turn on how well Biden governs and how the country goes in the next year. But I'm going to put that aside and say I'm a traditional, strategist, and I'm going to surprise you and say Tim Scott.
Oh,
African American, right?
Why is that surprise? That doesn't surprise me that much.
Okay, good, because you're a smart kid.
Right.
Why? African American. The Democrats absolutely depend upon the African American vote. He's no less conservative, in some ways no less toxic than Donald Trump, but he puts on a good face. He puts on this good, even though it's really not true, moderate, non-extreme, middle of the road, work with you kind of face. I think he's very articulate. I think he'd be a tough candidate.
Interesting. I don't think he has any shot to win, but hey.
No, I don't either, but that wasn't what I was asked.
Good point.
And remember, my predictions are totally nonpartisan. They're predictions, not endorsements. I predicted Donald Trump in 2016. I have a note from him hanging in my office. I predicted as many Republicans as Democrats. This is something really important to understand. Everybody has their own, political views. Everybody, even those who claim they don't. But the whole point of being a scholar and a forecaster is you've got to put that aside. Scholarship is not by its nature liberal, conservative, Republican, or Democrat. It's a search for truth. Now, the politicians can spin it, but it is a search for truth, which is characteristic, too, of my political analyses and political predictions, as apart from my personal views.
Vivek Ramaswamy, you know much about him?
Not really.
Okay.
He seems to be, I guess he's a successful business person who's really gone on, if anything, to Donald Trump's right, or at least as far right as Donald Trump, and has been as vociferous a defender of Donald Trump as there is in the Republican field. Obviously, he has no chance to win the nomination. There are at least 5 or 6 candidates ahead of him, but he makes news. And anyone who makes news, gets at least to be a little bit well known. I'm sure that's what he's after. Just, you got to remember, not everyone is in this to win the nomination. There are lots of folks who are in this for other reasons, including just promoting your name and your business.
Doug Hall asks, how objective are you in terms of deciding each of the keys results?
Well, if I wasn't objective, I wouldn't have been right for 40 years.
Are there any is there any specific, he wants to know also, is there any specific technique that you use to stay objective?
Well, A lot of it has to do with my training as an historian. One of the things we're taught, and I've been doing this for over 50 years.
Since you were 9.
Since I was 9,
Right.
Started at American University in 1973. It's the same thing as in a court. The only thing that counts is the evidence and the analysis. And you have to stick to that. You kind of got to be a Sherlock Holmes, analyzing tobacco ash, or, in this case, the documents of history. So I've learned that over many, many years about how to stick to the evidence and to stick to a logical analysis of that evidence. And the other thing I've learned is there's a whole philosophical school called phenomenology. I'm not going to get into it any more than that, but one of the key insights of phenomenology is working through things afresh. It's called the phenomenological epoche. You put aside everything and you look at things anew, fresh, keeping aside all of your preconceptions. It's hard, but it's essential.
Nice one. I'm not Weebisware. They said they want to boost their question. I don't see your question, so if you can ask it again, I'll try to get to it. There's a lot of questions. I'm trying to keep up, but I can't.
When do I get to eat my Georgia peach?
You want to try to take a bite?
Probably not. It'll drip on my
drip
tie.
on your tie. Yeah, no, that's not a good idea. I don't think it's ripe either, actually.
Oh, okay. No, it doesn't.
No,
seem
it's
to be
hard
ripe.
as a rock.
It's like the case. It's not quite ripe yet.
Ah, let's get.
But it will ripen.
Let's get peaches in chat for the Georgia peach today, folks.
Yes, the Georgia peach will ripen.
Let's see here. Has there ever been a charismatic incumbent that lost?
No.
Never.
Never.
No.
Charismatic challengers have lost, but
Right.
never a charismatic incumbent, and rarely even a charismatic challenger.
President Belichick, I think you remember him, right? One of our presidents in the chat. He asked, what has to happen in Ukraine to gain the foreign policy success key?
Oh my gosh, I'm not a military analyst, but it can't be just a stalemate. Ukraine has to make some real gains in retaking territory back from the Russians. They don't have to do it right away. The counteroffensive could, grind slowly, so long as it grinds finely. They've got a year, and that's what has to happen.
Gotcha. We've actually got a couple of Georgia residents in the chat today. So shout out to Georgia. Shout out to all the people in the
I'm
chat.
sure they're not in the indictment.
No, I'm sure they're not in the indictment. Let's see here. Another quick foreign policy question by Kevin, who's now asked it a couple times. So I got you, Kevin. I'm going to ask your question, all right? If Israel and Saudi Arabia normalize relations, is that a major foreign policy success?
Could be. We'd have to see the exact details of the deal and how it affects the Palestinians. As Dwight Eisenhower said 70 years ago, until the situation between the Israelis and Palestinians is resolved, nothing will be settled in the Middle East. We saw that with the Camp David Accords. They were great. They were a foreign policy success. But, what was that, 1978 or so, over 40 years ago, and things are still unsettled. Eisenhower was right.
Here's a question from Jackson Madison. How does Professor Lichtman's 13 keys retrospectively evaluate the 1876 Hayes-Tilden and 1888 Harrison-Cleveland elections in which the popular vote winner did not win the Electoral College?
Originally I was only looking at the popular vote, and it's really unclear in 1876 who really won. The winner of the popular vote lost the Electoral College, but nobody really knows the outcome of that election because there were electoral votes in dispute in South Carolina, Louisiana, Florida. It's always Florida.
Always Florida.
And it was resolved by...
Even in the 1800s, it was Florida?
Always Florida.
Florida, come on, guys.
Always Florida. And it was resolved by a partisan commission of 8 Republicans and 7 Democrats, so old 8-7. And who knows who really should have gotten those popular votes in those, incredibly chaotic late Reconstruction times in those southern states when they were kind of in transition between Reconstruction and being reclaimed by white supremacists. And 1888 was, Cleveland won the popular vote by just a hair's breadth. It was really just about a tied election, similar to 2000.
Here's a question from Andrew Jones, who's asked, who's asked a couple times. Why was the scandal key turned against Trump if the impeachment vote was strictly partisan?
The impeachment vote was not strictly partisan. I think Romney voted to convict, and it's very rare to have any.
Right, that's a fair point. But
I don't go just by congressional votes. I go by my own analysis of the way in which the Trump administration was scandalous. In my view, regardless of the outcome of the impeachment vote, what Trump did in Ukraine was in fact scandalous, and I wrote this up in my book, which you'd all look at, 13 Cracks, Repairing American Democracy After Trump. And there were so many other scandalous things that Trump did, such as corrupting the Justice Department. It's ironic that Trump and his allies are talking about the Biden administration weaponizing justice, when in fact that's exactly what Donald Trump did, corrupting justice on behalf of cronies like Paul Manafort and Roger Stone and Michael Flynn and others. And, directly pressuring, not even indirectly, directly pressuring justice to do his bidding.
Now, is there any validity? Now, again, you mentioned that you have a lot of Republicans in Congress going on and saying this is a weaponization of the DOJ. This is Biden and the Democrats out to get Trump. I know that's all just fire to the flames, right? But is there any validity to their point that he's a American running for president, a former president? We should let him run and let the people decide if they want him to be president or not.
But the people should not be deciding with incomplete information. These charges should be resolved before the election so the American people will be voting on the basis of the most complete information regarding that candidate. I would also remind everyone, most of you are probably too young to remember the Clinton impeachment, when these same Republicans who are now saying, Trump should be left alone because he's running for president, were saying no one is above the law, including a sitting president, Bill Clinton, who should be held to full accountability even while he was president for his alleged crimes. And now, of course, Trump's defenders in the Republican Party have swiveled 180 degrees on that. But critically, the only way the American people get complete information and can make the most informed decision is to let these trials play out.
Good answer.
And if Trump's exonerated, he's exonerated.
Good answer. High five. Another one. Come on, better one.
There we go.
All right, we're going to start wrapping up here, folks. An interesting question from I Don't Like. Can Ted Cruz and Rick Scott lose?
I don't think so.
No, come on.
I hate to say it, but I've done a lot of work on Texas politics. And for 20 years, my friends in Texas have been saying, Texas is going to turn blue. The Hispanic vote's going to rise up and turn Texas blue. You know how many statewide elected Democrats 20 years later there are in Texas? It's a trick question. Zero. But there's one bright spot. The Attorney General Paxton, the most corrupt, in my view, Attorney General in America, 8 years ago was indicted for crime and still hasn't gone to trial. Just shows you if you're rich and powerful what you can do. But he is now on trial. He's been impeached, and he is now on trial on the by the Texas Senate for removal. And the case seems to be pretty strong. So that's one bright spot I see in Texas politics.
All right, folks. I think that with that, we will wrap it up today. If you have more questions, tune in next time, tune in next week. I want to give a couple people a shout out. We've got Tariq still tuning in at the very end. We've got Linda still tuning in at the very end. We've got Ross Goldberg still tuning in at the very end. We got Bryce still tuning in and Barry. So thank you all for Robert Lopez. Patrick Murray still here. So shout out to all of you for sticking out until the end. If you like the podcast,
Go ahead.
if you like the podcast, please share it. Please like it. The liking is very important because it helps the YouTube algorithm. Please like it. Please subscribe if you haven't already subscribed.
Get your friends to subscribe.
Get your friends to subscribe.
And tell them you're getting content here you're not going to get anywhere else.
Exactly.
You may agree or disagree. It doesn't matter. But you're going to get unique stuff.
We've got Staffer. We've got Gamer. We've got Jackson Madison still tuning in. We've got Punk on Demand. We've got Peggy Smith. Thank you all for tuning in. Did you have a final say you wanted to say? You put up your finger.
Yeah. My
Okay.
final say is Trump can huff and he can puff, but he can't blow the courthouse down.
And with that, good night.